doing the type of things, air-to-ground, close air support. However, in the Persian Gulf, it was all totally different. In a low, medium-intensity conflict, we jacked up our altitude to stay away from the AAA. We were mostly worried about the ground threat.
The Gulf War thrust the Warthog into frontline combat. But it was rumored that the Air Force hadn't wanted to send the A-10s over at all because they feared the slow-flying planes would be easy prey for Iraqi anti-aircraft guns. On January 17th, 1991, A-10s were among the 668 coalition aircraft that took to the air for the first massive assault of the Gulf War. Missions were long, and pilots were taxed to their mental and physical limits.
I flew 3 missions on the first day, a total of about 8 hours of flying time and about 12 hours in the cockpit. When you came back from a mission, you didn't even get out. You hot pit refueled as you sat there with engines running, going over with the intel people on what you did, where you went, and how it all worked out. They gave you current intel, and then you moved over to another slot where they put the bombs and guns on board. Basically, as 12 hours in the cockpit doesn't really, we train for it, but you're really not, it's never comfortable in a single-seat cockpit with an injection seat. However, we've done it before, and you can do it over and over. It's, by the end of the day, they actually have to help you out of the cockpit.
A-10s were in constant danger of attack from Iraqi surface-to-air missiles. To stop the SAMs, F-4G Wild Weasels were sent in with radar-seeking missiles. With their radar neutralized, Iraqi soldiers fired blindly at aircraft noise. But the A-10 is relatively quiet. So quiet, the Iraqis called it the silent gun.
9 times out of 10, as you're rolling in on a target, you're concentrating so much on the bombing run that you really can't think about the AAA. If you do, you're going to have a lousy pass. You're usually hearing it from your wingmen saying they're shooting you up pretty good. AAA, you better start moving. You pull off into the cloud, hopefully that they're only going with a visual type of shot at you. But yeah, we've seen it all, and they said that you only see probably about 30 to 40% of the AAA fired at you. So that's just with the tracers and the rounds that are blowing up around you. The rest of the stuff you never see.
Got a good Maverick lock. Okay, sure there's something in there? Okay, firm. Okay, fire. I'm off left.
We will return in a moment to Weekday Wings on the Discovery Channel.
He's not moving. He's gonna live. What are you? You look dead. What are you? You look like something. Okay.
You don't think that there's 3 guys in that tank that you just put a Maverick. You think, well, you know, that was just a tank. And I think you depersonalize it yourself. If you didn't, it's sort of like knowing that people are out there shooting at you. If you think about it, tube and tents, and sit there at night between the Scud attacks, and then yeah, it's going to drive you crazy. A lot of guys go to church a lot, all of a sudden, and they see things different ways. You do a lot of sitting, watching the sunsets as you're coming back over the border. You have another hour of flight just to get back to the home base. So you watch the sunset and you think about things, and it's your time to move off to the side and forget about what you're doing for a little while. And yeah, it takes a lot of, I guess, discipline to think about what you're doing, the reasons you're doing it. And I'm sure everybody had to go through that in their mind. And, you know, everybody came out with it fairly well.
The A-10 was the least sophisticated strike airplane in the Gulf, but it was also one of the deadliest. The 144 A-10s sent to Southwest Asia flew almost 8,100 missions. They destroyed more than 1,000 enemy tanks and thousands of other vehicles and artillery pieces. A-10s can carry up to 16,000 pounds of ordnance on 11 external stations, including cluster bombs and Maverick missiles for ground attack, and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles for air-to-air combat. But more often than not, pilots used their Avenger cannons against tanks, and in a first, against an Iraqi helicopter.
I rolled rolled in on the helicopter, so from about 12,000 feet. Nobody had fired an air-to-air missile off an A-10. It was the first time, of course, we're carrying them in war, the AIM-9s. So I tried to lock on with the AIM-9s, and they just wouldn't do it because of the hot background and the helicopter looking down from that altitude. I tried 2 lock-ons, and fortunately, I remembered to arm up the gun. Once I couldn't get a lock, I decided to put a few bullets through him, so maybe 75 bullets. I told my wingman if he had a shot to take a shot. He tried, but his slant range was too far off, so he missed, and then I just pirouetted over and put about 300 rounds into it, and there wasn't much left after that.
Maverick was the A-10's other primary tank-killing weapon. These 500-pound guided missiles reach supersonic speed when they hit their targets, and not even the best armor can survive a direct hit. There are 2 types of Mavericks. Television-guided missiles are used in daylight. The missile sees contrasts between objects and backgrounds. Maverick is a fire-and-forget weapon, so when a pilot fires his missile, the video image cuts off. Infrared Mavericks, which were used in great numbers in the Gulf, detect targets based on differences in temperature. Since metal cools at a slower speed than sand, it was easy for pilots to spot tanks in the desert.
Okay, I've got what appears to be a building and some distinct hot spots around it. Roger, that's your target. Okay, he said north. The area should be. I got a mover.
Mavericks were sometimes used by A-10s equipped with pavepenny pods. Pavepenny detects the laser beams used to mark targets by laser designation planes. A-10 pilots have earned their reputation as down-and-dirty fighters by making the most of the limited materials on hand. For instance, the pilots of the 355th Tactical Fighter Squadron, the only dedicated night-flying A-10 unit in the Gulf, sighted targets by using the video system from their infrared Mavericks as a sort of poor man's forward-looking infrared scanner. The night fighters also employed the primitive but effective tactic of dropping flares over their targets. A-10 pilots sometimes wore night vision goggles and sighted targets through regular binoculars. Ground troops or other pilots called in airstrikes. Then A-10s flew in, dropped their blinding flares, then strafed and bombed targets at will. The Iraqis did their best to hide their armor, to little avail. Here, a night-flying A-10 has spotted an Iraqi tank hidden under netting designed to hide its infrared hotspot. The shape of the tank is obscured, but the tank tracks around the netting are easy to see. By the end of the war, Iraq had lost over 90% of its tanks, 90% of its artillery, and 50% of its other armored vehicles in the Kuwait theater of operations. The Iraqi soldiers who survived the non-stop air assault were those who learned to put as much distance between themselves and their weapons as possible.
Okay, we got people running.
Gosh, personally, I don't know. I stopped counting. I stopped counting the number of missiles I fired. I stopped counting the bombs I dropped. It's just, as I said, I guess someday in my mind it'll come to me, but I sort of push that off to the corner of my mind. It's you just go from day to day, and you write your letters home, and then you go to sleep and you get up for your next missions. But if I can't even begin to tell you how many tanks. I just didn't keep count.
The problem we faced with the A-10 was the fact that because of its slower airspeeds, it was more susceptible to enemy ground fire. With about 10% of our forces, we suffered over half our casualties on the Air Force, United States Air Force side, through the A-10. I think the Marine Corps had a similar problem with the AV-8 because the way the engines are located along the center line of the aircraft, and the heat-seeking missiles would strike the middle of the airplane rather than the tail. So you have to look at each aircraft's design and weigh its strengths and weaknesses to know where to use it in the battle. The A-10s were superb. However, they were more vulnerable to the enemy defenses.
That vulnerability was offset by the A-10's amazing resilience. Pilots flying into anti-aircraft fire were particularly thankful for the titanium bathtub, the super hard cockpit shell that shields them from flak.